Welcome, everyone, to the first mid-season, preseason episode of Revolution Recap, home of the 2020 MLS Is Back Tournament champion New England Revolution. It has been a long few months, but we finally have soccer to look forward to as the groups were decided this week for the MLS Is Back Tournament. The Revs were selected in Pool C of the tournament and will be facing off against DC United, Toronto FC, and the Montreal Impact in a bonus mid-season Orlando Maple Syrup Derby. I'm Greg Johnstone. Joining me today is the founder of the Maple Syrup Derby, potentially making his Revolution Recap debut. I'm not totally sure, but Julian Cardillo is here with us today. Julian, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. And I think this is my Revolution Recap debut. So, again, thank you.
Yeah, I can never tell because Sean had his radio show back in Providence back in the day, so I'm never sure when it's a debut, but it's been a long time coming, and we appreciate you coming on the show. We also have, hailing from everyone's least favorite New England state, Jake Catanese of the Bent Musket is here. Jake, how are you doing?
Now, hold on, wait a minute. I'm confused. This is an MLS Is Back tournament?
Yeah, because MLS is back.
So we're not going to talk about the University of Connecticut going to the Big East. That's not what this is about?
We are 100% not talking about UConn in any way, shape, or form.
I think I've been hoodwinked.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jake. I know that's usually what I tell you to get you on the show, and I'm surprised you fall for it. You fall for it every time. It's pretty amazing.
You know what? I do. I really do. That's my fault. Eventually, we're going to have an entire, Ryder Bryant basketball podcast.
Yes, we still need to get our mid-major college basketball podcast going. Hopefully next year, I suppose. I'm sure we'll get 10 listeners on it. But getting back, the MLS Is Back tournament, the groups have been drawn. The Revolution have been mixed with those three teams that I just mentioned. Drawn into Group C. Just very quick, immediate reactions. Julian, what do you think about the draw, and how do you feel about the Revolution's chances?
Honestly, I think it's a pretty interesting draw. You have a rivalry there being that it's Toronto and Montreal. So I think that's kind of the matchup everyone's looking forward to. But I see this as pretty doable for New England. Granted, we're only two match days in, strictly speaking, but they didn't look bad really in either game. They looked very competitive. They probably should have won both of them, before the big pause. And I think if you're Bruce Arena, you got to feel pretty good with who you're lumped in with. I had some people telling me on Twitter they thought this was a group of death. I in no way feel that way. I think these are going to be cool games, definitely, probably very competitive, but neither of these teams really scare me or should scare New England.
I don't think it's a group of death. I really think, maybe, there's a big maybe the only group of death might be the LA group, which I think is Group F. Group B could also be a little interesting because I think the Western Conference is just a little bit deeper and it's more condensed because they've only got three groups of four, whereas the Eastern Conference has that one weird group because they moved Nashville into the East, which is fine, doesn't bother me. I'm actually more interested in seeing the knockout group. Obviously, the top two people and a bunch of third place teams are going to make it into the knockout stages. I'm more interested in seeing the bracket that comes out of this. I think that would be a much more interesting talking point to see how that format and that gets played out from the results early on. I certainly see no reason why New England shouldn't advance into that. Like Julian said, I don't think any of these teams necessarily scare me. Toronto, when they're rolling, however, could be a problem. That would probably be the one team that I would think to myself, I want to really gauge how New England's doing out of this long, extended preseason, as we'll call it, due to the coronavirus. I think that benchmark game will really be against Toronto. That might be a good judge of where both teams might be as far as the group stage goes.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate what you guys have said, I think every game, not just with the Revolution, but every single game in Group C is going to be competitive. All these matchups are pretty evenly matched. I guess Toronto is the strongest on paper, but I don't have any doubts that the Revolution will put up a fight in each of these. A lot will come down to conditioning and to strategy, because obviously this is kind of uncharted territory. But I think if you're the Revolution, you don't have NYCFC, you don't have Atlanta, and you're not in that weird 6-team Group A, which we can kind of complain about the format all you want, but just based on math, you have a much better chance finishing in the top 2 or the top 3 and advances a 3 seed, coming out of a 4-team group than being in that 6-team group. I think those teams really kind of got screwed, and their odds mathematically are a lot lower from being in an expanded group. On that note, though, Jake, you kind of touched on it, so I'll ask Julian here in a second. But what's your opinion about the tournament format? I think personally that the MLS did a pretty good job of throwing this together, having the group stage contribute to the regular season. So if you end up having a regular season later on, you've kind of progressed a little bit into that. Julian, do you have any positive or negative things to say about this tournament format?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, everyone's just happy to have competitive soccer back in this country taking place. Obviously the NWSL is doing its tournament in Utah, and MLS has this format. So, and to some degree, I think any tournament at all is positive. And I think it'll be exciting. I've seen people liken this format to a World Cup. I'll tell you that a few weeks ago, I was feeling super nostalgic. So I went into my attic, I got my PlayStation 3, and I started playing the old qualifiers for the World Cup. And so I get it. I definitely get that mindset. And then you have Bruce Arena saying, this is not the World Cup. Like don't get it twisted. So I do think it's exciting. My only kind of reservation about this whole thing is that there's going to be a handful of weekday games to kick off at like 8 or 9 a.m. And I don't like that at all. I don't think that works very well. But, it sounds like they're doing what they can for the most part to make sure this flows, make sure that the games are accessible, outside those few 8 or 9 a.m. games.
Yeah, and one other thing, too, that I want to bring up about this kind of weird format, and as I say, my only beef is with the Group A, and I think that if the Revolution were pulled into Group A, I'd have a lot more to say about it. But I think, too, that if there is issues, if there are health problems beyond this kind of mini tournament, I think that if the MLS has to cancel their season in September, October, which there are a lot of fears about, we have some sort of closure in crowning a champion in this kind of, Mickey Mouse MLS Is Back tournament. So I think overall MLS gets positive marks in throwing this together and kind of adding a World Cup format, which I think casual soccer fans really like, and I think we will get a lot of kind of casual sports fans tuning in with the odd, 8 and 10 p.m. and 9 a.m. start times aside. I think they did really well overall. Jake, we're going to go around and do some predictions, so I'll start with you. Give us a prediction on what you think the Revolution will do in terms of the group stage and in this tournament overall.
I think getting out of the group, I think being one of the automatic qualifiers, I think finishing second is not unreasonable. I think this is a team that's had some decent success against both Montreal and DC in recent years, and this is not the same DC team with Wayne Rooney storming around that it has been the last couple of years. I'd like to see them, take this seriously and make a run, given that they do have a few moving pieces, and the group stage games are significantly important for the standings. DC is ahead of them, Montreal is ahead of them, Toronto is ahead of them. So, this is something where, we've said it before, New England is not known for being a team that starts off fast. This is, the preamble of the summer swoon. It's summer now. We can't be swooning. We need to actually use this, to re-jumpstart the season. It's a tough ask. It really is. But I don't think I don't think it's an impossible task.
So do you have a predict? Do you think they'll advance from the group stage? I'm putting you on the spot here, Jake.
I think a nice second place finish, like obviously they're probably going to be like a tie or something where finishing the automatic qualifiers, finishing the top 2, and then I'd like to see them win at least one knockout stage game. Not like penalty. No, I want to see them win a knockout stage game, not penalties. Like actually go out in a tournament style and go and take a match to someone, because it's something that New England is not overly known for the last few years. They haven't had a lot of knockout success. Obviously, there's the one Open Cup final run a few years back, but aside from that, it's been a little lackluster since the 2014 Cup final run.
And Julian, what do you think? You think the Revolution advanced from the group stage?
Yeah, I mean, they're a playoff team, right? They're a reigning playoff team. I will say I think it's going to be I can't imagine them losing to Montreal twice. I mean, I know it's kind of different that first week of the season versus now, but the rosters are basically the same, and they get Carlos Heel back. I'm kind of with Jake. I could see them finishing in second place, and I think that has to be the goal, to at least get out of the group. And then in a format like this where you get 5 substitutions, plus, the knockout games are relatively close together. I mean, I could very easily see them making a run as well.
And one thing too that I feel is kind of the ace in the hole for the Revolution is Bruce Arena has been to a World Cup before. He's kind of managed this style of a tournament, and there's going to be a lot of unpredictability in terms of conditioning, how well these players are fit. There's no real preseason before this. They really have 2 to 4 weeks to train before their actual games again. So I believe that having an experienced coach like Bruce Arena will pay dividends. Do you guys buy into that theory at all, that the Revolution will, are better off having a guy with Bruce Arena than maybe Montreal has with Thierry Henry?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a sense, it's anybody's game. I think you can make the World Cup argument, even though it doesn't sound like Bruce Arena is making that argument, on his own behalf. I will say that conditioning is going to be huge, and I'm sure we're going to get into it later, but, some of the numbers in the middle of the field with the Caicedo injury aren't really in New England's favor right now. And I think that they're really going to have to spend some time next week and the week after figuring out who it's going to be that's going to carry the load in central midfield. And I think that's going to be particularly critical because New England's actually never, ever won a competitive game in Orlando in all competitions. And I think you can really attribute that to the heat. I mean, I've seen a lot of blown leads in Orlando, and they've pretty much all been in really sweltering condition. And I'm kind of expecting it to be a similar situation weather-wise this time around as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned too, the central midfield, and we did get some news about Luis Caicedo this week that he will miss the rest of the season. He had surgery on his meniscus in his right knee, so he has been placed on the season-ending list. Luis did not appear in either game at the start of the season and was not in the 18. So this isn't a huge surprise, but I think people were expecting him back. He also was in and out of preseason. He was dealing with an injury, and it should be noted that he had surgery on March 11th. Which was, I believe, the day before the MLS season was called off, and it was days after that last Chicago game. So it doesn't sound like the pandemic really had a lot of effect. I know that in baseball there were a lot of pitchers that had Tommy John surgery when it didn't look like there was a season, and they kind of got a jump start to their surgeries. Whereas this seems like something that was an immediate need for Luis Caicedo. Jake, I'll move it to you. How big of an impact is Luis Caicedo, and who do you think will fill in for him?
I mean, New England's always had a wide host of midfield options, but now you're really limiting the number of holding midfield options. You've really only got Wilfred Zahibo and Scotty Caldwell as true holding midfielders. We've seen Diego play there. We've seen Kellen Rowe play there. I think we at one point last year saw Juan Agudelo play there. So I think it's going to be interesting, and it's sort of, I think these 3 games, while they're important because they are for the regular season standings, these 3 games are also important for New England because they have to sort some things out. And this might be, like I said, one of the reasons why I think this is a tough ask but not an impossible task for New England to like finish second in the group, win the group, win a knockout stage game. You're going to have to mess around with that midfield a little bit. You're going to have to find some kind of a balance. I am personally not a fan of the idea of Gustavo Bo playing like a number 10 and Carlos Gil playing a winger. I want Carlos Gil in the middle of the field as often as possible. I don't want him cutting in all the time, despite the fact that it might tactically work or make sense. If you're going to have 2 strikers, I want Carlos Gil behind them. Then you have to sort of build the rest of the formation behind that. Are you going to have 2, more central, like shuttling midfielders, and then just maybe one Wilfred Zahibo behind them instead of Luis Caicedo as a diamond midfield? There's a lot of interesting tinkers that can happen. I'm sure we'll see a lot of them. As Julian mentioned, I love the 5 substitution idea. I actually hope that becomes a permanent thing going forward, or an expanded substitutions bench after the virus goes in, because we're just, soccer's been ridiculously behind in certain things like that, and teams are bigger and youth development is so much bigger, so that having the opportunity to play more people regardless of the current health situations right now is going to be an important thing, I think, going forward. And I hope that aspect becomes a permanent issue beyond this year, but we'll have to see what FIFA and the IFAB do about that. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things. Bruce Arena's going to have to juggle, and it's not just the formation, it's not just the subs bench. I think he needs to balance how, he needs to take this tournament seriously, and in particular the group stage, because of the importance for the regular season. So, they've really got to buckle down these next couple of weeks. It's going to be interesting because I don't know how much we're going to see of training in the games and things like that. It's going to be a much more different learning experience because it is really preseason. It's just we're just counting the games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, we actually got a question about the squad rotation. Joe on Twitter asked us, what are our expectations for squad rotation with quick turnaround and 5 subs? And, Julian mentioned the Heat in Orlando and how it's you have to manage, conditioning too. As I say, these guys are coming in with 2 to 4 weeks of real preseason. We're going to be starting this tournament less than a month from now, and they just got back to team training, so it probably won't be the best soccer we're ever going to see, and it's going to be in the Orlando Heat, which is a tough ask for us New Englanders. But getting back to your point, Jake, I think one person that might fill Luis Caicedo's role is Isaac Anking. Maybe not 90 minutes each game. Maybe he won't be a starter. I personally think that we're going to see Diego Fagundes, who was paired with Wilfred Zahibo in the first 2 games. I'm sure he'll be the one eating up the most of those minutes. But I think there are going to be guys like Justin Rennicks, Tayon Buchanan, and Isaac Ankings who are, looking to kind of make that next step and our prospects. I think this is a really important tournament for them to, get some minutes, show what they can do, and maybe that'll springboard them to a bigger role outside of the tournament. And I want to highlight Isaac Anking too, just because, there is that gap in midfield. It's been a couple of years since we saw him, since his debut at NYCFC. And I'm a big fan of him. I think he could do some great things. So I'd like to see him make some 20 to 30 minute appearances in the group stage and see what he can do. Julian, what are your thoughts on the Luis Caicedo injury, and who do you think will fill in for him alongside Wilfred Zahibo?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a big hit, and was someone who was kind of one of the few bright spots during the Brad Friedel era and really carried it into the Bruce Arena era. Just did a lot of dirty work, pretty creative in tight spots, working with Zahibo and Carlos Heel. So that is a big loss. In terms of who's going to cover for him for the time being, I mean, I think that, again, they have to kind of work that out in the next few weeks and play to the structure of the tournament. But my sense is that Bruce Arena is willing to give Fagundes extended minutes in central midfield. That's kind of where he played in those first 2 games. I think if you want to play safe and play conservative, maybe you give Caldwell a run out because he knows the position. He's played it well, and he's kind of a what you see is what you get player. He's going to just make the easy pass. And sometimes, that's kind of what they need just to settle games down. But my vote right now is for Fagundes.
I think that's the odds-on favorite, not just because he started those first 2 games, but it seems like Bruce Arena has a lot of trust in him and feels he can handle that position. So we do have a couple of questions on the back of the Luis Caicedo injury. Randy LH asks us, any rampant speculation about what Arena might do to fill our significant gap at central defensive midfield? And at DenDun29 also asked us, will the Revs add another midfielder this year? A lot of people aren't really trusting the central midfield by rotation, Fagundes, Rowe, Anking, Caldwell cluster, and a lot of people are speculating that maybe the Revolution go out and add an extra midfielder. Julian, I'll ask you, because I listened to a little bit of your Twitter Live and you kind of talked about this yesterday, but do you think Arena will fill that central midfield gap eventually as a result of Luis Caicedo leaving, or will he stay in-house?
I mean, I think he has to at least look at it, right? I don't think that the calendars will align for them to kind of add a player in the middle of this tournament. But, down the line, once things settle down, once, UEFA transitions its current competitive calendar to next year's, I think that there are some chances for that to happen. There have been no credible links, or even non-credible links between, foreign players coming to New England. But, that doesn't mean that the speculation mill is just not churning at all. I think what's going to happen, just given the circumstances of this disease and what it's done to halt competitive soccer and player movement, is that you could have players abroad who are, maybe more willing to give MLS a chance because it means continuing to play, versus, having to kind of wait for things to settle down in Europe or elsewhere. So that might be kind of an advantage for teams in MLS, including the Revolution. There have been a few European players that have already been kind of mentioned as being targets for MLS teams. You have Pastore with Roma, and you have Fabian Johnson getting linked to a few MLS clubs. So I will say that, getting back to the Caicedo thing, it's going to be a position that Bruce Arena at least has to look at, especially if in this tournament Diego Fagundes isn't working out.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always been like the one position where I've been advocating, I want to say for several years, of you really need a true destroyer number 6 type. And we haven't had one of those since Jermaine Jones was around, and that really was the big final piece to the puzzle, and it made a lot of things just work better. And Zahibo has been solid, Caicedo's been solid, but to me they're sometimes very similar players. Caicedo's probably a little bit better on the offensive or the passing game. Zahibo is a little bit more of the enforcer type, but they're just very nice box to box players, and what you really need is just that big ball winning midfielder, hits those big diagonals, starts the counterattack, and those players are not easy to find. And the Revs are already kind of sort of maxed out on a lot of things on the roster. They've already got 3 DPs. They've already got a handful of TAM players. I don't know what the international roster situation looks like now that Caicedo's on the injured list for the year. That spot might be opened up if New England wanted to sign someone.
I don't mean to cut you off, Jake. I'm pretty confident that does not open up a roster spot. I would have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that
I was trying to find it right now, and the roster page that I normally go to isn't populating for me for the Revs as far as how many international spots they have. So if that spot doesn't open up, well, that makes things a lot harder because I don't think they have an available international spot. I mean, they could always go out and get one.
Yeah.
From another team, but
again, I don't want to cut you off here again, but Samba 2. That transfer was canceled. He would have had to have taken up an international spot. So we're not totally sure what the roster looks like, but the Revolution, in theory, we're going to gain an international spot somehow, whether or not they're going to trade for one or one of their current international players got a green card. I know some people were speculating on Twitter about Mancien, and I know De La May has been here a few years. I have no real credible information on that, but I think the international thing can be worked out either way. But you are absolutely correct. As of right now, to our knowledge, all the international spots have been locked. And as Julian says, there's going to be a lot of issues with the transfer market this summer. So I'm not totally sure. It is an area that I do think they need to address, but they are very limited, it seems like, in terms of international roster spots, in terms of TAM. And it's not totally clear if they can go out and get that major impact player that the Revolution would like to have.
Right, and you know what? For the first time in a while, we can actually say, like, not only are they almost full of international roster spots and TAM and DPs and all those other things, they might be very, very close to full on roster spots in general. Because I remember a handful of years ago, I can't remember if it was Friel's first year or Heaps' last year, they started the year with 23 active players on the roster, and I knew that I had like multiple conniptions and aneurysms when that happened because I'm like, that's an Olympic style roster. That's a roster that's designed to play for a month, not 7 months. So now the fact that they have a full roster and a full staff and guys and Revs too and everything else, we should give credit to the fact that, okay, yes, while the Revolution do have this one problem at this position because of a major injury, other things have been developed that help mitigate that a lot better than in years past. In years past, it probably would have been Kellen Rowe or Diego dropping back from that attacking midfield spot to that holding midfield spot or balancing out the formation that way. Well, now, even though that's probably still the answer, there's still more options around them. There is Isaac Anking who can drop in. I would love to see, just for hilarity, I'd love to see Juan Jones just in the middle of the field, just sprinting forward 90 miles an hour, just for fun. Maybe even something weirder, put Andrew Farrell there. Like I have no problem with trying things, particularly this year. Like, of all the years to try and go out and do something weird, this is the year to do it because everything is broken. So you might as well continue to break things and just see if it works, because there's no wrong answers, I don't think, this year. Obviously, you want results. Obviously, you want to develop as many players as you can. But that's also balanced along the fact that we didn't play soccer the last 3 months, and it kind of sort of ruined everything.
I do like the thought process of there's no wrong answers this year. And one guy we haven't talked about is Nicholas Firmino. And I know Damian Rivera. I don't know if they're necessarily defensive midfielders, but there are also some young guys who have played, in the center of the field that might be able to contribute in some way. But one more thing before we move on, I just want to point out that the Revolution have at least one senior roster spot open. So they do have a pretty full roster, but there is some wiggle room again. So it is possible, but we're not totally sure how feasible it is. Point being, they are a little limited on space in terms of going out and getting another big signing. And then one more thing I wanted to point out too is that there was a few weeks ago, Petrus Bumal popped up on Twitter. And I don't know if you call that a credible rumor, Julian, or a non-credible rumor. It's probably a little more in the non-credible rumor section, but he has been linked to Fulham recently and has talked a lot about going to England. So it sounds like the link to the Revolution has kind of cooled down for him, and he's kind of moved on to potentially going to the Championship in England. So I do want to get to some listener questions, some of which we have touched on a little bit. We touched on Joe's question about squad rotation. We also talked, Any Revs UK had a question about who would fill alongside Wilfred Zahibo, and if we see them playing with maybe a formation change. I know, Jake, you talked about that. But there are some other questions regarding the MLS Is Back tournament. And the first one is Paulo. We kind of touched on this one, but I'll go around and make this a formal question. He asks, what is the biggest threat in the group and why? My personal opinion is it's Toronto. I think they're the best team on paper. But Jake, I'm curious on who you think out of those three teams, DC United, Montreal, and Toronto, who do you think is the best team and the biggest challenge for New England?
I think it's definitely Toronto, because I think Toronto has the most talented roster. And I think if that roster is clicking, if Josie's working well, if Bradley is, being Bradley and not being like mediocre and things like that's the team that I think would scare me the most as if I were New England, because I think from a matchup standpoint, I think they sort of play a similar style, and I've never liked going up against like what I call the mirror matchup of the same like 4-2-3-1 type formation, because I feel like New England sort of always have kind of struggled with it at times, particularly against many years ago against Columbus. I was always like, God, Higuain's going to kill us. Higuain's going to kill us. And then he did kill us, but we also murdered like everyone else on the back line, and it didn't matter in that playoff series. So I think Toronto is the one team, they've got, Alejandro, I think Pozzelo, Pablo Piatti, they've got a new crop of DPs and international signings that team bothers me if it's clicking all together. I'm not sold on DC United. I think DC United's lost a lot of talent and a lot of firepower. And Montreal is, I think it's hard to judge Montreal after just 2 games. I know they beat New England, but I wasn't necessarily convinced that Montreal, like, they beat us on the scoreboard, but I think like New England for the most part outplayed them in that game. So I'm not so much worried about competing against Montreal. Obviously, you want to get the result. Right now, Toronto would be the unknown of, this team might be better than us. How do we get a result from them? And that's the only team I would say that in the group.
Julian, who do you think is the biggest threat to the Revs?
I'm going to say Toronto as well. I just think that they have more experience in these kind of tournament formats. I mean, you just look at them in terms of the MLS Cup playoffs and Champions League and the Canadian Championship. They know how to get out of groups and move on, and that's to their credit. And I think they've got a nice balance of newcomers and veteran experience. I do think that some of their newcomers could be sort of wild cards, but, they made it through the first 2 games of the season with a win and a tie. So, more power to them. I agree with Jake that DC United is probably much different, obviously much different without Wayne Rooney, but I think that there's still a lot for that team to sort of figure out on the field. And Montreal, I will say, I think is very balanced in a way similar to New England, really. But, if you really kind of say that New England and Montreal are on the same keel, assuming that Toronto is the real deal, I would say that Toronto is the main threat.
Revolution Report asks on Twitter, will Henry Kessler keep his starting center back spot? There's a lot of rotation there. You got to assume that Andrew Farrell is going to hold down one of those starting spots. We might see some rotation, but Henry Kessler did impress in those first 2 games. Julian, do you expect Henry Kessler to, I'll change the question, to eat up the majority of minutes at center back during this tournament? Do you think he's filling that second center back spot there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously it's good to have De La Mea and Mancien back as well. But you know, what's he done to lose the spot, right? I mean, barring a catastrophic second preseason, I think it's his to lose.
Jake, any thoughts on Henry Kessler keeping that starting spot?
No, I mean, I think Kessler, obviously, it'd be nice to see him get the bulk of the minutes there, if only because I think he needs them more. Being a younger player, I think that also opens up the possibility of moving a Farrell or a Mancien into that holding midfield spot, as awkward as it might seem. But you've got, you're going to be playing a lot of games in a short amount of time, and you've got extra subs. So, doing weird things and experimenting with ways to close out games, I'm all for. But I would want to keep Kessler at that center back role for as much of that as possible, and try and leave him specifically alone and just let him, learn the system, learn his teammates around him, work with Turner in goal and things like that, and just continue to grow and be the top draft pick that we all hope, and after 2 games seems to very much be the prospect that we think he is.
Revolution Report also asked us what our predicted 11/preferred 11 is for this tournament, which I think you guys will agree is a really difficult exercise because we won't know who is in form, we won't know conditioning. So it's and the other thing too with the 5 subs is I feel like you could, in theory, put out a team and start out very defensively and then throw on, an attacking player later on. You could really change a lot of things around and end up with the best team on the field at the end of the game as opposed to the start of the game. So I'm going to kind of sidestep that question and kind of change it to who do you think is kind of the wild card and who do you expect to see a lot of minutes from? So, we've talked about Isaac Anking, but Julian, I'll start with you. Is there any kind of big contributors that you could see hopping into the starting 11 that we didn't see in those first 2 games against Montreal and Chicago?
Yeah, I'm going to say Justin Rennicks. Player with tremendous upside, had the U23 World Cup experience last year, has pretty much been limited to the bench. Actually, I think he's exclusively been limited to the bench his entire time as a pro with New England. And it just seems like, I'm not saying that he should have been starting, but it seems like he's been teetering between being a bench player and being a starting player for a long time. And I could very easily see in a tournament where you can have 5 substitutions and kind of change the shape of your team on the field, at least once in a game or twice in a game, to have someone like Rennicks come in.
In a similar fashion, I'm going to say our draft picks from a couple of years ago in Tajon Buchanan and DeJuan Jones, because as Julian mentioned, this is, and you mentioned, Greg, as well, this is absolutely the kind of format with the extra subs where you can start the first half with a particular formation and then the second half have a completely different one. And you still have significant options down the road off the bench. I want to see New England playing with 2 outright strikers, which means that one of those strikers, if it's not going to be Bo or Busca for the entire time, that means you're going to see someone like Rennicks, someone like Buchanan, heck, even someone like Jones, I'd have no problem with being up there. Teal Bunbury as well. I want to see 2 striker formations. I don't want to see New England always in a 4-2-3-1. I want to see them do something different, particularly now that Caicedo is out, and that might not be an ideal situation for the team defensively. So in lieu of having, a couple of guys in front of the back line, let's go with the theory that a good defense is a better offense. And that's something that I don't think New England has been able to do a lot the last 4 or 5 years. Now you've got the firepower in the final third in spades. I'd like to see Bruce Arena unleash as much of it as possible and as often as possible in these 3 group stage games.
Yeah, and in my personal opinion, I think the only person that you can expect to see 90 minutes in all 3 group stage games is Matt Turner. I think we could see a lot of rotation. We could see a lot of youth in this tournament because I think Bruce Arena might see this as a chance to get Justin Rennick's more minutes than he normally would get. I know Justin Rennick was coming off the bench. Tayon Buchanan, you also mentioned, got some minutes, but I would not be shocked to see Damian Rivera make an appearance. One big rule change too that I should have brought up earlier is that all 23, you can have 23 man rosters coming into this game. It's not limited to 18. So you can have some prospects kind of on the end of your bench that if you are winning 2 or 3-0, you can put in Justin Rennick for Adam Buksa or, I don't know. The options are endless. So yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do, and it'll be very interesting to see how Bruce Arena manages it. But I do expect to see a lot of youth in this tournament.
And you're also, like I said earlier, with the depth of the Revolution roster, you're too deep at every defensive backline position. If you count Farrell as a center back, you've got 4 center backs. You've got, in theory, 2 right backs if we count Bai and Jones, and you've got Sinovic and Butler. Like, you're too deep at every position. There's a lot of utility that you can do in moving those fullbacks forward and playing them more as wingers. And you can absolutely do that with Sinovic and Bai and Jones, or moving Farrell out wide. There's a lot of ways, Greg, like you said, that you can end the game with a very different formation. I want to see New England do that. I don't care if it's closing out the game. You've got 5 defensive people in a row. However you want to do it, I want to see significant tactical changes, not just 5 like-for-like subs to get players, fresh legs out onto the field. I don't want to see that in this tournament from the Revs and really from anyone, because I don't think that helps anyone in this kind of format. When you're playing all these games back to back, just using it as conditioning, I don't think helps anyone.
And it's good that this is happening in a year where the Revs do have 28 guys on their roster and not 21 in years past when they've had the roster flexibility mindset. Getting to the lighter things, the lighter side of things, I should say, Jay Alexander Dolan of the Bent Musket, the photographer of the Bent Musket, asked us, what should the MLS tournament trophy look like? And he suggested doing kind of like a WWE kind of replica belt, but he wants to do the spinner belt, which I don't know if you guys are wrestling fans at all, but John Cena in the mid-2000s had a spinner belt where they would spin the logo, and it was quite childish. So I'm all for that idea. Jake, you're kind of laughing. Do you have any thoughts on what this MLS Is Back Tournament trophy should look like?
So the only thing, I don't know how many of our listeners have seen this, but every now and again when I go and read the news and I see one of those big COVID-19 articles, it'll have like a super zoomed in graphic of like the shape of the virus, which looks like a ball with a whole bunch of little like pinhead things sticking out of it. If we're going to go with the WWE style belt, that's the thing that I want spinning in the middle, the little like 2D icon of the actual virus. Or you have to call it the COVID Cup, and the ball at the top of the MLS of like the trophy, instead of it like the football on the top of the Lombardi Trophy, it's the little COVID-19 virus ball.
I kind of like that. And while you were talking, I was kind of picturing, like, you remember the crystal ball they used to have for college football?
Yes.
Kind of do a crystal COVID-19.
Just a crystal COVID-19,
yeah,
like just a gem.
I love that.
I'm all for that. I'm all for that.
We did get one more question that is a little above our pay grade. Hans asks us, what do you think they will do for the rest of the season post COVID-19 tournament? He kind of has the idea of saying the East might play only the Eastern Conference games, the West only plays the West. Bruce Arena stated in an interview earlier this week that he expects 20 to 25 games overall, which would include 3 games in this tournament. And I believe, I don't know if it counts the 2 games at the beginning of the season. I'm not sure how they're handling that. But Julian, do you have any thoughts about how they might handle this? I know it's kind of all up in the air, but any thoughts on what we might expect post-COVID tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see anyone really feeling super comfortable prognosticating any of this. Just given that the economy is only slowly starting to open up, and people are talking about a second wave. So I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I will say, though, that right now they have only accounted for 1 Champions League spot to be allocated, assuming that MLS does not come back. So it's in pretty much everybody's best interest, assuming there is a Champions League next year. And and assuming they're going to use this season to structure the allocation order and the draft order for next season to kind of get the competitive schedule going again. And that's to say nothing of the TV revenue, the merchandising revenue, and the ticket revenue. But I don't know. Who knows? Who really knows? If you like anything right now, think about how much you like it and then put it in a safe and then forget about it because Corona might take it.
It has ruined everything.
It's ruined everything. Vacations, everything.
I also think, too, we're not going to see fans at all. I know some people have kind of said that maybe we will see fans in stadiums at one point. I don't think so at all. So I would not be shocked if they do more neutral location games or something like that. The one thing I will say is that I think as more sports start to come back, if they do continue games, don't be shocked to see weekday games or games at 1 p.m. or during the day to not compete with other games. Because I think one thing that MLS does want to do is kind of put the spotlight on themselves and bring in some more casual fans. I think this is a really good opportunity for them. So, Jakes, any thought about what you might want to see post COVID-19 tournament?
No, I mean, obviously, going to a game this year would be great. It's not something that's very high on my priority list at the moment. I have a very large TV in my new condo. I'm fully expecting to get a whole bunch of mileage out of it in the next couple months. Not that I haven't been paying for that extra sports package from Optimum and all that nonsense the past 4 months. But yeah, I think player safety and fan safety is going to be very important. Florida you need to get your together. Right now, because you're not doing a very good job. Utah.
We don't have an explicit tag, Jake. You got to watch your language there. This is a family show.
I'm just saying. Listen, we're hosting all these tournaments in the NBA wants to come back in Vegas, and soccer wants to come back in Florida and Utah, and you can't be if this is going to work. What we've been doing the last 3 months and the soft reopening, things like that, we still have to maintain what we've been doing with this virus. And I know I'm going into work mode right now and first responder and all that nonsense. Be safe, everyone. Concerts and sporting events and things right now, we can watch them at home. We should continue to watch them at home until it is abundantly clear that it is safe for 80,000 people to get together and do dumb things. And right now we don't need to be doing that as much as we want to. So yeah, I'm just hoping that we we learn from this. We stay safe in the short term, and this is a weird season. No matter what happens after this, you're always going to view any 2020 professional season that either started or ended as just weird. The standings are going to look weird. The fixture list is going to look weird. You're going to look back at the history and be like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was the virus year. That was one. That was weird. But God forbid the New England Revolution are the only team in MLS history to win a Superliga and the COVID Cup, because if you thought I was insufferable about the Superliga trophy, you do not want me to be rambling on about that proverbial crystal ball we just invented.
Yeah, and it also kind of brings the question of, if the rest of the season is canceled, is this a real trophy? I think the Superliga is a good kind of comparison where it kind of feels like I don't want to say secondary trophy, but I don't think it will have as much weight as the normal MLS Cup or even the U.S. Open Cup if the Revolution end up winning at the end of this. But that does it for our listener questions. We did have one other interesting bit of tidbit that I wanted to pass along for our listeners that aren't on Twitter. It came out this week. Brad Friedel did an interview about his time with the Revolution and mentioned that, or he claimed that his requests to trade certain players were denied. I don't know if either of you have a reaction to this, if this changes your opinion on Friedel or Burns, but I thought it was worth pointing out. Either of you have any reaction to this apparent, trade requests denied by Friedel?
Yeah, I can't believe it took 2 years for Brad Friedel to figure out that it was Mike Burns' fault.
I just think it reinforces that the current Revolution setup that was exposed after 1 year of Brad Friedel and died about 13 months ago, that needed to be found out and discovered a lot sooner by the Reds organization. But we're not here to talk about the past. We're here to talk about the future, and the future involves what I hope now is hoisting either a gigantic crystal ball that looks like a virus or a spinner belt.
And one thing, too, before I move on, but on that Twitter thread, someone said, I bet Kellen Rowe was one of the people that had been asked to traded. And another person chimed in and said that he saw Brad Friedel at a Target and questioned Kellen Rowe's commitment. And Kellen Rowe, who has been very active on Twitter, jumped in and said that I was one of those people. I was very tired after a training session in the heat. And he seemed to kind of push back on that Friedel comment. So Kellen Rowe and Brad Friedel are not on each other's Christmas card lists. That kind of tension continues. But and another person too that I wanted to point out, and Julian, I think this is your reporting, but Gabriel Somi was apparently got a trade offer from Cincinnati, and the Revs for some reason did not do that. And so I wonder if Mike Burns kind of overruled that trade, and that was another thing that might have been squashed by the front office that Brad Friedel kind of wanted to move on from. So again, complete speculation on my end. I have no idea if that's true, but I was kind of thinking of names of who might be players that Brad Friedel wanted to get rid of that were squashed. And the first thing I thought of was your story there, Julian, about Gabriel Somi. So interesting to see if there's any link on that. So
yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to say before you wrap up, Brad would say even at the podium, numerous times, like, the way that the old regime did things wasn't good. We've had problems with player commitment and the way players set goals and this and that. He never named players by name, but this was kind of a common theme with him at the podium. So, I do think this is a gripe that Brad did have, and I think it was a frustration of the front office, or his frustration with the front office and Mike Burns, and I'm sure Brad Friedel wasn't the only one, but the moral of the story here is that Brad Friedel still, though he had a bad partner in Mike Burns, was not cut out to be a tactical coach of the New England Revolution.
Yeah, and that was kind of the criticism coming in, that he had not had a managerial job before this. We can sit here all day and say who's more to blame, but I think Brad Friedel and Mike Burns both kind of had some deficiencies, and I think even though the Brad Friedel tenure lasted, 18 months, I would not be surprised if we hear more and more little tidbits come out over time, because certain Revs players have been vocal, like Kellen Rowe, about how they did not like playing for Brad Friedel, and Brad Friedel doing a lot of interviews and is still talking about the Revolution. So I don't think he will stop talking about the Revolution and how he got out a raw deal until he gets another managerial job. So even though it lasted 18 months, I would not be surprised if we hear tidbits like this for years to come. So that wraps us up. We'll do final thoughts, and you guys can pass out your Twitter handles. Jake, I'll start with you. Anything you want to wrap up with?
No, just, I think that this would be a very good time for soccer to really address substitutions and really look, more concussion protocols and things like that, because you have all this focus on medical attention right now in the short term for player safety and staff safety and everything else like that. I really hope that that's something that continues. I hope that you get an extended bench list. I hope that you're dressing something like 20, 23 guys and you're able to sub on, 7 or 8 players. I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but as much as we love the Mike Magee shutout in goal a couple of years ago, there's no need for outfield players to be playing in goal. It's 2020. You should be able to dress 3 goalkeepers, and if one guy goes down, you just put in the other one. It doesn't even count against your subs. That doesn't make the game better. It doesn't help develop goalkeepers and get them minutes. I think now is a very good time to start addressing those shortcomings, because it was only a handful of decades ago. We didn't even have substitutions at the World Cup. So the fact that we're still on this whole, you can only change out 3 players out of your 11, when every other sport in the world has almost unlimited substitutions. I think it's time for soccer to sort of join the 21st century again, as we constantly, I think this sport, internationally, FIFA is behind on implementing those things, and when they do implement them, they usually do it badly. So hopefully that's something that comes out of this virus and pandemic and things like that, is a lot of more medical protocols, more substitutions, things of that nature. Because I think in the long run, the game has changed. Youth development's a lot bigger. There's no reason to have a 40-man roster and only 14 guys play first division soccer every week. So.
And Jake, where can people follow you on Twitter?
You can find me at Catanese43. We might have more ramblings on this substitution thing later on tomorrow, maybe Monday. And you can follow us at the Bent Musket. We're hoping that now that the soccer is back, you're going to see a lot more from us. We've been a little bit dormant. We've been a little bit busy. But hopefully we're going to be slightly back and probably not better than ever, because it implies that at one point we were good.
Well, I mean, if you were never good, then you should be better than ever, right?
Yes and no. Yes. No, I can't remember.
And keep an eye out for that article about what the trophy will look like. Julian, where can people follow you on Twitter? And please give us your final thoughts if there's anything that we did not cover today.
Yeah, this might be for a different show, and something may have happened on this. I'm not totally sure, but I don't think it has. A new format for World Cup qualification. There are some rumblings that CONCACAF is changing that very convoluted and very unfair existing qualification structure for Qatar. But if they don't change it, then Canada is out of the hexagonal. So going to have to keep an eye out on that. And my Twitter handle is just my name, at Julian Cardillo.
Yeah, and as a half Canadian, I certainly got to say I'm not for screwing over Canada. It's really a shame that they've absolutely destroyed the Hex. You can follow us on Twitter at Revolution Recap, and please like our Revolution Recap page on Facebook. Please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. We always appreciate those reviews. Also, I do want to point out that if you have not already, I encourage you to go back and listen to our recent interviews from May. We did 5 interviews over the month of May while there was a pandemic with some really, really great interviews about some guys like Ted Chronopoulos, Brian Dunseth, Shalry Joseph joined the show, Henry Kessler. We did notice our numbers dipped down a little bit, which makes a lot of sense because people are no longer commuting, or they at least temporarily were not commuting. But, you know, none of those are necessarily to say current events. There's still a lot of good stories, so if you're looking for a podcast, I recommend to go back. And if you don't have time to listen to all 5, I strongly recommend you go back and listen to the Jay Heaps podcast. He gave a lot of great details about his time with the Revolution that I think a lot of Revs fans would find interesting. But we are hoping to be back next week, though I cannot make any promises on that yet, so don't hold me to it. But either way, we'll be back to talk more soccer soon as news breaks. Until then, thank you everyone for listening, and go Revs.